I've played Sonic Forces more times than I'd care to admit, and to be honest with you, this is probably the most positive review you're going to get out of me for Sonic Forces. Don't get me wrong, I still think it's a bad game, but I think it's a little bit more nuanced than I would have said before. The gameplay is split between 3 different characters. You have Modern Sonic, Classic Sonic, and your own original character. The Modern Sonic stages are honestly where some of the gameplay shines the most. The levels, generally speaking, aren't that amazingly designed, apart from a few exceptions here and there, but the gameplay has definitely been tweaked in Sonic Generations, with the homing attack being far more responsive. Just in general, the gameplay for the most part was pretty good. Apart from some baffling situations here and there, 9 times out of 10, the gameplay was actually pretty nice. My biggest problem was that I just wish we had some more dynamic and interesting levels. Visually, the levels had a lot more going on to make the levels more interesting and generally more memorable, but I wish the gameplay was beefed up to match. A lot of the time, the level design is far less interesting than what you would see in Sonic Generations. Classic Sonic, meanwhile, is easily the lowlight of the entire experience for me. And this isn't like with Sonic Generations, where it was still good, but just not as good as the modern Sonic stuff. This is a case where I actually think the classic Sonic stuff was really bad. Like, there were so many times when I was playing with the 2D controls, and I don't know what they've done to them, but there were so many times where I messed up a jump, and I was like, okay, this is getting ridiculous now. I never had this problem with classic Sonic in Sonic Generations. This is a bit ridiculous. And just in general, the classic Sonic stages just became something that I dreaded every time I saw that little light blue icon appear. Every time I saw that, I knew it was going to be a classic Sonic stage, and I knew that I was just going to have to grit my teeth and bear it to get to the other 2/3 of the game, which I found much more appealing. The other third being the original character, and this is definitely the standout feature in Sonic Forces, as you get to create your own original character, customize it however you want, with a whole litany of different weapons that you can try out, some of them being more useful than others, which we'll get into that. And honestly, I think this was a really smart idea. Sega knows their audience. They know that original characters for Sonic are ubiquitous, so giving a feature where you can create your own character is honestly really smart. And it's something that, much like the Chow Garden, I think it should just be a feature that they include in as many Sonic games as they possibly can. Which, by the way, yes, I am one of the many who wants the Chow Garden back. Now, in terms of the weapons that the original character gets to have, there was a few that I got to try out. The flame weapon is pretty good. There was a lightning one, which I remember was pretty nice. There was a cube one, which I felt was a bit too situational at times. You had to get way too close to the enemies at times if you wanted to do multiple at once. There was a drill weapon, which in 2D spaces was so overpowered, but in 3D spaces was basically a death sentence to use. And then there was this one where you had clones of yourself, which was so OP that I absolutely destroyed a boss or two with it. Like, it's so much more powerful than everything else I used in the game that I only ended up changing the weapons just because I wanted to experiment some more. You can also replay levels with Shadow the Hedgehog and Super Sonic, but they're not really any different than just playing with modern Sonic, so I don't really know why you would want to go back unless you really love Shadow the Hedgehog that much. As for the levels themselves, for the most part, when you're doing the modern/original character levels, they're okay. Like, they're nothing too special. They're definitely far less interesting than some of the levels we got in Sonic Generations, with a notable exception here or there. The Metropolis levels aren't just a situation where they look better like the rest of Sonic Forces, these actually generally play better and are far more interesting, such as a level which is probably the best showcase of the villain Infinite that we get the entire game in my opinion, but just in general far more interesting gameplay-wise. I don't know who designed the Metropolis stages, but they probably should have designed the rest of the game too while they were at it. Or if they did design the rest of the game's levels, they should have designed it to this level, because this was by far some of the best stuff the game had to offer. If Sonic Generations 2 ever got made, then they would have to take a lot of stuff from Metropolis to represent Sonic Forces, because this was the highlight of the game in my opinion. But overall, gameplay-wise, despite my compliments, I genuinely just didn't find it all that engaging a lot of the time. The classic Sonic stuff, like I said, dragged the whole experience down. The boss fights I didn't find all that engaging at all, apart from the Death Egg robot towards the very end of the game. Everything else just felt so lifeless? Like, I don't know how else to describe it. There's a fight you have with Zavok, there's a fight you have with Metal Sonic, there's a fight you have with Infinite himself, there's actually multiple, and I can't say that I really took much from it. They're so easy, and there's not really that much iconic about them. It seems that they were simply trotted out for nostalgia value, which doesn't make any sense in this situation. I really wish that they'd spent more time just focusing on Infinite. Because every time it feels like they're pulling a Sonic Generations, it actually feels like it's dragging itself down somewhat. The music, much like the rest of the game, is also very hit and miss. Some of the tracks are really actually quite good, while some of them, especially the classic Sonic stuff, I really did not like. I don't know what it is, but classic Sonic really is just the worst part of this game just overall. Like, if they chopped that out, I feel like I'd be a lot more positive to this game. Graphically, the game is just actually really good. Like, this is one part that I can't fault at all. Like, for the gameplay, which can be hit and miss, with the music that for the most part is alright, but sometimes it does have a few misses here and there, the graphics just in general look really nice. They've gone out of their way to make sure that the levels are all visually very interesting, with a lot going on in the background. It just makes each level stand out just that little bit more as a spectacle. The only bit that I really don't like is that the characters all feel a little bit more washed out. The colours are definitely more muted as opposed to other games like Sonic Generations. Otherwise, I don't really have a bad thing to say about the graphics. After I beat the game, I did go on to Episode Shadow, and man, I wish this was longer than 3 levels, because 2 of these levels are some of the most interesting that the game has, easily standing up next to Metropolis as some of my favourite parts of the game. Obviously, this is just a part where it's all modern Sonic style gameplay, so it's already off to a great start with the improved controls, but it also feels like on top of the levels just looking nice, they actually went out of their way to make sure each level was designed in a way that it felt more interesting to play. It didn't feel like I was just kind of mindlessly boosting along with a few jumps here and there. There felt, a lot of the times, I needed to time my jumps just right, otherwise I was going to take damage. The levels were still very short, but it felt more engaging, and I just wish we had more like that. Unfortunately, Episode Shadow really shouldn't be a separate option because there's only 3 levels. I beat the thing in less than 15 minutes. It's honestly a little insulting that it's its own separate thing, making you think like it's going to be this whole experience and then it's over before you even know it. Again, it's also another interesting use of Infinite because while there's no cutscenes, which really is another absolute... it annoys me, but during the levels, they'll have these moments where Infinite is interfering, pretending to be Rouge and Omega, and it's so good to see like the ways that Infinite can mess with you, even if you don't see it happening. This is something that they absolutely could have put into the main game. Like when Shadow appears in the main story, they could have then had you flashback to playing Episode Shadow. That would have been better. Overall, this is a game that has so many parts that work really well. You know, the modern Sonic gameplay is much improved. The modern Sonic controls have been improved. Some of the levels are really engaging. The visuals are better than Generations. The music can be pretty nice. But then there are so many things that bog it down. The classic Sonic stuff sucks. The classic Sonic music sucks. There are some weapons with the original characters that are completely unusable most of the time. The boss fights aren't very interesting. It's just, overall, it's a bit of a mess. The parts where the game shine so brightly that when you play the bits that suck about the game, it really just puts you in a bit of a bad mood. And as I've been talking about this, it reminds me why me and my friends who were into Sonic were so disappointed by this game's release, because as we discussed at the time, there was so much promise, but I don't think we could really articulate what we had on our minds. And while I gotta keep this review somewhat short for VGCember, yeah, like, there is so much that could have been improved. And the fact that it's so close to actually being a somewhat good experience is what makes it all the more frustrating. I don't think it's the worst Sonic game of all time. Like, I've heard some people bandy that around. I don't think that's true. Like, it has some bad moments, but this is more just a game that's frustrating. It's a 5 out of 10 experience, maybe a 6. That should have been like an 8 or a 9. It has the tools to do it. Don't get this game, I don't recommend it. There is a few things here and there that I enjoy, but overall the experience just isn't worth your time. There are infinitely more experiences out there in the Sonic library.